Sumerian tablets are probably one of the oldest form of written record that we have.
There is a clay tablet sitting in a museum basement in Istanbul that nobody is supposed to read out loud anymore. It's 5,000 years old. Catalog number VAT 12772. And what it describes existing under the ocean floor near the Persian Gulf is so specific, so technical, and so impossible for anyone in 3000 BCE to have known that when a Turkish-American expedition finally went looking for it in 2004, they found it on the third day. Hexagonal pattern, 7 cylinders, 400 meters down. The Turkish government shut the dive site down within 3 weeks. The tablet is still in the basement.
They've been translated, and they tell exciting stories about how gods intermingled with human beings and actually had a hand in the creation of human beings.
The basement in Istanbul. Most visitors walk right past it. A small, beige, slightly chipped clay tablet in a glass case at the back of an annex room. Catalog number VAT 12772. No plaque, no description, no audio guide stop. The kind of object that fades into the wall. But this tablet contains something that shouldn't exist. A description of structures beneath the ocean floor written 5,000 years before humanity had submarines, sonar, or any way to see what was down there.
Here is a Sumerian tablet that actually shows the tree of life, flanked by divine beings. You can see here the Anunnaki on each side.
The Sumerians called the place the Abzu. And here is the catch. They didn't describe it as a myth. They didn't describe it as a metaphor. They gave it coordinates, measurements, architectural details that match formations marine archaeologists only discovered in the last 40 years. The tablet describes massive stone columns rising from the ocean floor near the Persian Gulf, chambers carved into underwater rock, and beings who came from the sky descended into the Abzu and emerged with knowledge that transformed human civilization overnight. The Sumerians didn't call any of this magic. They called it technology. They documented it the same way we document a factory or a laboratory, with precision, with measurements, with purpose. This isn't vague mythology. The tablet is a technical document. It reads like a maintenance log. And what the structures contain, that's the part nobody is allowed to talk about. The Eridu Genesis Collection.
Holding a tablet that was written thousands of years ago and being able to read what it says, it's an amazing feeling.
The tablet itself is part of what scholars call the Eridu Genesis Collection. Eridu was the first city, according to Sumerian records. Not the first city we know about, the first city, period. Before Eridu, the Sumerians say humanity lived in scattered groups with no writing, no agriculture, no civilization. Then, the Anunnaki arrived, and everything changed in a single generation. Yeah, about that. Most translations focus on the mythology, the gods, the creation of humans, the flood. But there's a subset of tablets nobody talks about, technical tablets, inventory tablets. And this one, VAT 12772, which describes infrastructure. The kind of infrastructure you'd need if you were setting up a long-term base of operations on the ocean floor. The tablet describes the Abzu as a structure, not a realm. It gives dimensions. The entrance is a vertical shaft that descends through rock and emerges into a chamber with 7 levels. The first level was for water processing, the second for purification of air, the third for storage of knowledge, the fourth for biological processes, the fifth through 7th are damaged. What remains describes geometric patterns carved into walls, glowing stones that provided light without fire, and a central chamber where the Anunnaki would interface with what the Sumerians called the Me, the fundamental principles of civilization. That's the description. Now here's where it gets harder to dismiss, because in 1968, somebody saw this exact thing on a sonar screen, and the file got buried for 33 years. The 1968 sonar anomaly. A Soviet submarine, on a routine patrol of the Persian Gulf, picks up a sonar return that doesn't match the sea floor. Massive geometric structure, 400 meters down. Hexagonal symmetry. Whoever was at the sonar station that night flagged it, the captain logged it, and within 24 hours, the coordinates were classified, the patrol log was sealed, and the discovery vanished into a Soviet naval archive for the next 3 decades. Then, in 2001, an old man, a former Soviet naval officer, retired, living somewhere outside Srent, Petersburg, dying of something he wasn't talking about, walks into the offices of an obscure Russian journal with a folded set of coordinates in his coat pocket. He doesn't give an interview. He doesn't take payment. He hands the editor the paper, says, "Publish these before I die," and walks out. 3 months later, the coordinates are in print. 6 months later, he's dead. A pair of Turkish archaeologists read the journal. They cross-referenced the coordinates with the descriptions on a clay tablet sitting in a museum basement in Istanbul. The numbers match. They put together an expedition. That's how Dr. Mehmet Ozdogan ended up on the deck of that survey vessel in 2004, hand-pressed against a sonar monitor, looking at 7 cylinders, arranged in a perfect hexagon. And get this, each cylinder was approximately 30 meters in diameter. Each one extended 90 meters into the seafloor. They were made of black basalt, and the nearest natural source of that specific basalt type is 800 kilometers away, in the mountains of Armenia. The cylinders showed tool marks, precise cuts, angles that don't occur in natural erosion. Ozdogan and his team, a joint Turkish-American marine archaeology expedition, spent the next 18 days mapping the exterior. They never breached the interior. They didn't get the chance. Because 3 weeks in, a Turkish naval vessel pulled alongside the survey ship, took the samples, took the documentation, and ordered the team home. If you've made it this far, and the silence is starting to feel deliberate, hit subscribe. This channel covers forbidden archaeology and suppressed history every week, and what's coming up next changes everything we just covered. The interview he never gave again. Dr. Mehmet Ozdogan gave one interview to a small Turkish-language regional newspaper 2 months after the shutdown, in a cafe somewhere in Ankara, off the main road. The reporter who took the interview said Ozdogan looked thinner than he should have, kept his coat on the whole time, and stirred a cup of tea he never actually drank. Ozdogan said the structures contained passages, internal chambers. He said in one of those chambers, the team's remote camera picked up something that made the lead Turkish naval observer end the dive immediately. He wouldn't say what was in the chamber. He wouldn't say who gave the order to stop. But he did say one sentence the reporter wrote down word for word. Whatever we found down there proves the Sumerian records are not mythology, they are history. That's the last thing Ozdogan said in print. He hasn't given another interview since. The site is a military exclusion zone. The samples are gone. The dive footage is classified. But the tablet is still in the museum basement. And what it describes goes much, much further than 7 cylinders. Where 2 rivers meet the sea. The tablet places the entrance to the Abzu, where 2 rivers meet the sea. In ancient Sumer, that would have been the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates as they emptied into the Persian Gulf. Except 5,000 years ago, the coastline was different. Sea levels were lower. What's now underwater was dry land. Overlay ancient coastline maps with the coordinates Ozdogan's team found, and they line up perfectly with where those rivers would have met the ancient shoreline. But it is not that simple, though. The Sumerians said the Anunnaki built the Abzu as their first base on Earth, a place where they could live, work, and interact with the planet without being exposed to surface conditions they found difficult. The tablets describe the Anunnaki as beings who required different atmospheric pressure, different air composition, and protection from what they called the poison sky. Exactly what you'd need if you were extraterrestrial beings operating on a planet with an atmosphere you didn't evolve for. And here's the part that makes skeptics uncomfortable. The tablet describes a device the Anunnaki used to descend into the Abzu. It calls it a skyboat that could travel through air and water, enclosed, made of a metal that didn't corrode, capable of moving without sails or oars. The Sumerians watched these crafts descend from the sky, enter the water, and disappear beneath the surface. And they wrote it down with the same matter-of-fact tone you'd use to describe a bus route. So what was inside? The students of the Abzu. The tablet describes what happened next. The Anunnaki brought humans into the structure, not as slaves. As students, small groups were taught what the tablet calls the sacred me: writing, mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, metallurgy, medicine, the foundation of civilization. And when these humans emerged, they became the first priest kings of Sumer. The tablet lists them by name. Those names match the Sumerian king list, another document scholars usually dismiss as mythology. The king list says the first kings ruled for impossibly long periods, thousands of years, tens of thousands in some cases. Scholars call this exaggeration. But what if the king list is documenting something else? What if those early kings weren't human at all? What if the Sumerians were recording the reigns of the Anunnaki themselves before humanity ever took over governance? The tablet describes the Anunnaki as taller and stronger than humans. With facial features the Sumerians found both beautiful and unsettling, and it describes their eyes specifically, reflecting light like the eyes of animals. Exactly what you'd expect from beings who evolved in low-light conditions, or beings engineered for environments with different light spectrums than Earth. So why isn't this in any textbook? Because somebody, a long time ago, decided it shouldn't be. The British Museum Archives. In 1976, Zachariah Sitchin published The 12th Planet, where he translated many of these Sumerian tablets and argued the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial beings from a planet called Nibiru. Mainstream scholars criticized his translations as inaccurate and his evidence cherry-picked. Some of those criticisms are valid, but here's what the critics don't address. Sitchin wasn't the first to notice these patterns. In the 1800s, British archaeologists working in Mesopotamia found thousands of tablets describing the same things: advanced technology, beings from the sky, structures beneath the earth and sea. Their reports are still in the British Museum archives. Their conclusions were quietly buried because they didn't fit the prevailing narrative. It wasn't a conspiracy. It was easier than that. They just stopped translating those particular tablets. The 7 Seals of Heaven's Metal. Tablet VAT 12772 describes the Abzu's construction in technical terms. Built before the Great Flood, designed to survive seismic events, rising sea levels, and atmospheric changes. The Anunnaki built it as a permanent installation, a base meant to function for thousands of years. And according to the tablet, it's still there, still intact, still sealed. The tablet describes 7 seals, not metaphorical, physical seals, made from a material the Sumerians called heaven's metal, a substance that didn't rust, didn't degrade, and couldn't be broken by human tools. Modern metallurgists who have looked at the description say it could be describing an alloy we've only recently developed, titanium aluminum compounds or ceramic matrix composites, materials that didn't exist in ancient civilization, but would be exactly what advanced beings would use for long-term deep-sea construction. Each seal served a specific function. The first protected against water pressure, the second against seismic vibrations, the third against biological contamination. The 4th through 7th are described in terms the Sumerians clearly didn't fully understand. Phrases like protects against the unseen fire and guards against the sky poison. Modern researchers believe this could be radiation shielding and atmospheric filtration. Protection against threats ancient humans had no words for because they'd never encountered them. And here is the catch. 12,000 years later, those seals are still holding. Stones that captured the sun. The tablet describes the interior lighting system, chambers illuminated by stones that captured the essence of the sun, stones that glowed without heat, without fuel, without dimming. For centuries, scholars assumed this was metaphor, but in 1998, researchers discovered that certain crystalline structures can store and emit light through phosphorescence. And in 2003, scientists developed materials that generate light through piezoelectric effects, converting mechanical pressure into luminescence. If the Abzu was built in a seismically active region, micro-vibrations from the ocean floor would provide endless power for this kind of system. The tablet also describes how the Anunnaki cut the stone, not with tools, with sound, acoustic frequencies that fractured rock along precise lines. The Sumerians described it as singing to the stone until it split. In the 1960s, researchers discovered that certain ultrasonic frequencies can fracture stone with surgical precision. We use the technology now in medical procedures and industrial cutting. The Sumerians saw it 5,000 years ago and documented it the only way they could, as gods singing to rocks. And get this, the Abzu had windows, not windows to the surface, windows to the deep, transparent sections in the walls, so the Anunnaki could observe the ocean. The tablet describes them as crystallized water that never melted. Modern engineers didn't develop transparent aluminum until 2006, a ceramic material as clear as glass, but stronger than steel. If the Anunnaki had something like that, they could have built observation ports that would survive at depth for millennia, which raises a question nobody has answered. Are those windows still functional? And if they are, what's looking out of them? Sealed before the flood. The timeline gets interesting here. The tablet says the Abzu was sealed before the Great Flood, the same flood described in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the same flood that appears in the Bible as Noah's flood. The same flood geological evidence suggests actually happened around 10,000 BCE, when the last ice age ended and sea levels rose dramatically. If the Abzu was sealed before that flood, it's been underwater and untouched for 12,000 years. 12,000 years, still sealed. Ozdogan's expedition only mapped the exterior. They never breached the interior. But their sonar scans showed the cylinders are hollow. They contain chambers. And those chambers showed no signs of water intrusion. Whatever sealing technology the builders used, it was still working after 12 millennia. In 2012, a Turkish structural engineer named Gökhan Sezer did something nobody else had thought to do. He took every architectural measurement from VAT, 12772, the 7 levels, the central shaft, the 7 seals, the dimensions, the spiral access, and he built a 3-dimensional engineering model of what the Abzu would actually look like as a functioning structure. Sezer published the model in a regional engineering journal in late 2012. He gave one talk about it at the University of Münster. He showed the rendering multiple pressure locks, redundant air filtration, modular chambers that could be sealed independently, a central shaft with spiral access, a power system the tablet describes as drawing energy from the Earth itself. And he said, on the record, that the structure described on the tablet was more sophisticated than anything humans built until the late 20th century. Mainstream archaeology dismissed Sezer's work as speculation and moved on. 3 years later, MIT changed everything. The MIT signal. In 2015, a team of marine geologists from MIT was conducting a routine survey of undersea volcanic vents in the Persian Gulf. They were looking for chemosynthetic ecosystems, bacterial colonies that thrive on heat and chemicals around vent systems. Pure marine biology, nothing to do with archaeology. What they detected instead was an energy signature. A low-frequency electromagnetic field was emanating from the seafloor at the exact coordinates Ozdogan had mapped 11 years earlier. Not random, not natural. The kind of clean, periodic electromagnetic field you'd expect from an active power system. And then they noticed the pattern. The signal repeated every 18.7 seconds. Picture the lab when that registered. The waveform on the screen, the marker dropping at 18.7. Then the waveform building again, peaking, falling, marker dropping at 18.7. Again, and again, and again. One of the researchers later said the room went completely quiet for almost 2 minutes. They thought their equipment was glitching. They reset it. The pattern came back. Same coordinates. Same 18.7-second interval. Same clean, repeating, mechanical signature. That's not geology. That's a clock. MIT published the energy readings in a marine geophysics paper. Officially, they attributed the signal to unknown geological processes. Unofficially, 2 members of that research team quit their MIT positions within 6 months and started consulting for private marine archaeology firms. They won't talk on record, but one of them told a science journalist, off the record, that what they detected wasn't natural, that it scared them, and that he didn't sleep properly for almost a year afterward. Something down there is still running. The departure and the seed of return. The tablet describes the Anunnaki leaving Earth, not dying, leaving. They sealed the Abzu, took their skyboats, and returned to wherever they came from, but they left something behind. The tablet calls it the seed of return, a mechanism that would let them come back if conditions changed, if humanity evolved enough, if the time was right. The departure is described with specificity that doesn't read like myth. The Anunnaki gathered at the Abzu entrance during what the Sumerians called the time of great darkness, scholars believe. This refers to a solar eclipse. 7 craft ascended together, while the remaining Anunnaki watched from the shore. Human witnesses were present. The tablet names them. Priests and scribes who recorded every detail. The skyboats are described as cylindrical, made from the same heaven's metal as the seals, surfaces reflecting light like polished silver. They made no sound except for a deep hum the Sumerians felt in their chests rather than heard. The craft rose vertically, creating whirlpools as they lifted, hovered for a moment, then shot upward and disappeared into what the tablet calls the black ocean above. They were describing vehicles ascending into space. And here is what's strange. This same scene shows up in completely unrelated cultures. The Vedic texts of India describe vimanas, flying craft with similar characteristics. The Egyptian Book of the Dead describes gods departing in boats that traveled through both water and sky. The Mayan Popol Vuh describes sky serpents that carried the creators back to the place of origin. None of these cultures had contact with each other when those texts were written, but the event they're describing, it looks identical. The Watchers who stayed. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Not all of them left. A faction stayed. The tablet calls them the Watchers, beings who remained on Earth to observe humanity's development and make sure the plan stayed on track. They didn't live in cities. They didn't interact openly with humans. They operated from hidden locations, underground facilities, mountain strongholds, and one group remained inside the Abzu itself, sealed in, with instructions to maintain the facility until the return. This shows up in the Book of Enoch, too. The Sumerian tablet describes the knowledge the Watchers held as timed release information humanity wasn't ready for yet, but would need later. Some Watchers broke protocol, gave humans knowledge too early, and that violation, according to the texts, is what triggered the flood. The tablet describes the flood as deliberate, not divine punishment, environmental management. The Anunnaki determined humanity had developed too rapidly in the wrong directions. War, violence, misuse of the knowledge they'd been given, and they triggered a reset. Geological evidence shows massive glacial melt at the end of the last ice age, sea levels rising over 100 meters, coastal civilizations wiped out. But the Abzu survived, the seals held, the chambers stayed dry, and the Watchers inside, according to the tablet, entered suspended animation, not death. A deep sleep that could last thousands of years. Now, connect that to a 2015 MIT signal, repeating every 18.7 seconds at the exact coordinates of those sealed chambers. The genetic key. In 2018, a major genetic study on ancient human DNA found something nobody could explain. Genetic markers in modern Middle Eastern populations that don't match any known human migration pattern. Markers that appear suddenly in the archaeological record around 5000 BCE, right when Sumerian civilization exploded into existence. The study didn't speculate. The researchers noted the anomaly and moved on. But here is the catch. The tablet says the Anunnaki gave humans the me for a reason, not generosity, strategy. They needed humanity to develop, to build, to spread, because Earth was a long-term project and they couldn't stay permanently. The tablet calls this the Great Plan, and it says the plan is still unfolding. Some researchers think the seed of return is genetic markers in human DNA that activate under certain conditions. Others think it's technological, a device inside the Abzu waiting to be triggered. A third group thinks it's both, a biological key, and only humans carrying specific genetic traits can access whatever's sealed inside. What if they never left? Here's the question nobody wants to ask out loud. What if they never left? What if the Abzu is still occupied? The tablet describes the structure as self-sustaining, biological processes, life support. The MIT team detected an active energy signature. The structure is sealed, functional. And if the Anunnaki built it to last thousands of years, why would it be empty? There's a reason the Turkish government shut down the expedition within 3 weeks. There's a reason the coordinates are classified. There's a reason Dr. Mehmet Ozdogan stirred a cup of tea he never drank, kept his coat on, and never gave another interview. Because whatever the dive camera captured in Chamber 3 challenges everything we think we know about human history, about human origins, about whether we are alone, and if we are not alone, whether we ever were. The Sumerians weren't writing myths, they were writing field reports. They documented what they saw. And what they saw was beings from the sky who built structures beneath the ocean, taught humans the foundations of civilization, and left with a promise to return. Tablet VAT 12772 isn't a religious text. It's a blueprint, a record, a message. And the structures are still there, 400 meters below the surface of the Persian Gulf, sealed, functional, waiting. The Sumerians called the Abzu the foundation of the world. They said everything humanity knows came from there. Writing, law, science, art. All of it originated in those chambers beneath the sea. And maybe they were right. Maybe human civilization didn't develop naturally. Maybe it was installed, taught, given to us by beings who had reasons we still don't fully understand. The tablet ends with a warning. The seals will break when the time is right, when humanity is ready. And when that happens, the knowledge inside will either elevate us or destroy us. Because the Abzu doesn't just contain technology. It contains truth. The truth about where we came from, what we were designed for, and what's waiting when the Anunnaki return. And here is the most shocking part. We may have already started waking it up. In 1995, declassified CIA documents revealed that Project Stargate, the agency's 20-year remote viewing program, had sent operatives to mentally probe an unidentified underwater structure in the Persian Gulf. The descriptions the remote viewers brought back, written in agency notebooks years before VAT 12772 was ever cross-referenced with Ozdagon's coordinates, matched the tablet line by line. 7 cylinders, a central shaft, sealed chambers, and something inside one of them that, in the words of one viewer, knows it is being looked at. If the Abzu has been sealed and waiting for 12,000 years, and the seals will break when humanity is ready, what does it mean that we already started knocking? Click the video on screen now. The CIA file on what those remote viewers actually drew is the next thing you need to see, because it's the document that turns everything you just heard from theory into something much harder to walk away from.